If you have a story you'd like to hear featured on the channel, then go to mariesfield.com and send it my way. And of course, thank you. I want to start this story by saying that I'm a bit of a broody person. It's just who I've always been. I've always been a bit more comfortable in the night when the world is silent and everyone else is asleep. I like to enjoy the time to myself. I also struggle with self-image and anxiety, so in order to keep myself healthy and active, I like to go for walks when it's pitch black out, especially on nights where I'm struggling to sleep. On this particular night, I was feeling rather restless, and I decided that I would go out for a quick walk around the block. I grabbed my jacket, my headphones, and my flashlight, and headed out into a rather lovely night. As anticipated, the streets were completely empty, minus the occasional car that would drive by every here and there. It was a bit windy, so the leaves were blowing about, which made it that kind of a magical night that I was hoping for. I was about 15 minutes into my walk when I was hit with this intense feeling that I needed to pause. It was a bit of a strange sensation, but I seriously felt like I just needed to stop for a moment. When I did, I noticed that one of the street lights ahead of me started to flicker. I wasn't sure if it was flickering prior to me noticing it then, but it was definitely flickering at the moment I noticed it. After staring at it for a couple seconds, I heard what sounded like a person saying, "Hey," from a bit of a distance. I was confused because I had my earphones in, and if there was someone that had said something from the distance it sounded like they were, I shouldn't have been able to hear them. I immediately took my earphones out and looked around, trying to see if I could see someone nearby that was calling out. When I turned back toward the streetlight that was flickering, it made a loud popping noise and completely went out, which made me jump. I wasn't sure what to do, but thought that I should just keep going, right? It was just a light. Surely it was just good timing on my part to be looking at it when it went out. I took a single step forward where the light was and once again froze. A voice called out again, "Hey, come here." My first instinct was to turn around and take off back home, but then my curiosity started to get the best of me. I know, stupid, but at the same time, this was too freaky to just turn away from and ignore. I grabbed my flashlight and turned it on, then slowly lifted it toward the darkness where the dead streetlight was. Much to my relief, there was nothing there. I actually chuckled to myself, thinking that I was just losing it and that I needed to get home and sleep. Just as I was about to turn off the flashlight and continue on, my eyes caught a glimpse of motion on the edge of the light, which shifted me from my relief back to terror. I watched as what looked like a shadow quickly darted from my flashlight and over toward the wooded edge of the street. I tried to follow it, quickly shining to the left, but I couldn't see anything. My heart skipped a beat as I stood there and just watched the tree line for what felt like several awkward moments. I just held the light, pointing it at the trees and waiting for something to happen. Unfortunately, something did. I saw what again looked like a shadow leaning slightly out from behind one of the trees. I was pointing my light directly at this thing, and yet it was still completely dark. As it leaned out, I once again heard the voice whisper, "Hey, come here. Please, come here." For a single fleeting second, I actually considered going towards it. But then my brain kicked back in, and I realized that would be the dumbest thing I could possibly do. I had no idea what the hell this thing was. I had no idea what its intentions were, and I was pretty much defenseless. Once that thought occurred to me, I felt that wave of terror wash over me. My legs felt like jelly, but I knew that I needed to get out of there. I started to turn to head back home, but was interrupted by what really triggered my flight response. That voice once again whispered at me, but this time it said, "I won't hurt you." Nothing that says "I won't hurt you" in the way that it did actually means it. I immediately turned and took off at a full sprint. I have never in my life ran that fast and for that long, but I made record time getting back to my front door. I fumbled with the keys, jumped in and locked the door, and then paused as I caught my breath and I tried to slow down my heart rate. After a few moments of just standing against my front door in silence, I decided that I would go to bed, and thankfully, that was my entire experience. The rest of the night was uneventful, and I haven't gone on a night walk down that road since. I thought about going back to see if I could find this thing again, but it kind of occurred to me that if I was that scared that night, there was a reason. It wasn't just because it was weird, it was instinctual. So I've decided that whatever that thing was, someone else can take the credit for finding it. Hi there. I wanted to share an experience I had when I took a cruise with my friend Raquel. We wanted to go in the summer after we finished our semester, but there was a crazy good deal on one coming up for spring, so we decided to make it our spring break trip instead. With the timing, we would probably miss the first few days back, but we both thought it was worth it. The first few nights were fantastic, but it was several nights in that the weird events began to occur. It started one night after we had been drinking. I started feeling unwell, so I told Raquel that I was going to head back to our cabin. After my nightly routines, I laid in bed trying to fall asleep while watching some show on my laptop. I had finally started falling asleep when something caused me to wake up. I laid there in the dark, trying to drift back off when I started hearing whispering. I ignored it at first, thinking it was just people in the halls, but then it dawned on me that this was very clearly whispering. It was normal to hear people talking and laughing in the halls, but it was always muffled. This was a very clear whisper. I turned back over to see if maybe Raquel had come back or if it was maybe something playing on my laptop. However, my laptop had gone to sleep mode and nothing was playing, and Raquel was nowhere in sight. I thought it was weird, but shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was someone outside, or maybe since I wasn't feeling well, that my senses were just on overdrive and it made it sound closer than it was. I ended up just turning something else on Netflix and fell back asleep. The next day, the whispering didn't even cross my mind. When I woke up, Raquel was in her bed and we got dressed and enjoyed another day. We were going to be at the Caribbean that day, so we didn't spend a whole lot of time on the ship. When it was time for us to get back on the ship, we planned on going to see the show they were hosting, but I wanted to take a shower before, so we both went back to our cabin. After she changed, she said she was going to head to the dining hall, and I agreed as I got in the shower. When I got out and dressed, I went back to the bathroom to do my normal makeup and hair routine. While I was in there, I started hearing the whispering again. This time, I was fully awake and cognizant. This was not a whisper coming from the hall. I walked out of the bathroom and looked around the room, and when I didn't see anyone, I called out, "Hello? Raquel?" But I didn't get an answer. I went and checked the door and saw that it was still locked too, so I was confused. I could clearly hear a whisper. I couldn't make out any words, but it may have been because it also sounded really fast. This kind of thing spooked me, so I quickly finished what I was doing and went to find Raquel. I met up with Raquel as she had already found a table for us and was enjoying a drink when I showed up. After I sat down and we talked briefly, I mentioned the whispering to her. I asked her if she had come back to the room at some point while I was still there, and she confirmed that she never did. I told her about the whispering I heard, and she thought it was weird too, but also tried to be reasonable about it, saying it was probably somebody in the hall or in the next room, or maybe it was the sound of the AC kicking on or something. I certainly wanted it to just be something like that, so I told her she was probably right and let it go so we could enjoy our night. As the night died down, we made our way back to our cabin. We were both a bit intoxicated and pretty tired, so after a quick change, we both crashed on our beds pretty hard. However, I woke up at some point needing to use the restroom. So I turned on my side light and made my way in there, but it was when I came out that I was a bit spooked. As I opened the door, I saw Raquel had turned her light on and was staring right at me with her eyes wide open. She looked terrified, and I asked her what was wrong. She asked me if I heard it too, and I didn't know what she meant at first, but then I finally caught on. She had heard the whispering too, but this time she said she could make out words. She said she heard, "Don't leave me," and it sounded like it was right next to her ear. She first thought I was messing with her because she heard me get up, but when she flipped over and saw the door closed and the light on, she knew that I wouldn't have had time to do that, then run to the bathroom, turn the light on, and shut the door. I was internally screaming at this point. I wanted to say I knew I wasn't crazy, but then I realized I wasn't crazy. It was something we both heard, so we knew it was real. We immediately turned on all the lights and looked all over the room, including under the beds, in the closet, the wardrobe, and drawers. I don't know what we were hoping to find. A person, some kind of device replaying someone talking or whispering? But in the end, we found nothing. We were wide awake and entirely too freaked out to sleep at this point, so we just laid in bed watching TV. We kept talking about it, going back and forth between what we thought it could be, rationalizing it, so we were probably just mistaken. I think we finally fell back asleep with all the lights and TV on around 4 a.m. Needless to say, that was a lazy day for us, but thankfully we were going to be at sea for the whole day. I think we both agreed to forget about it and tried to relax. We spent a lot of time in the pool and spa and ate about every chance we got in between. That night, we parked ourselves in our beds and planned on watching movies with the lights on until we fell asleep. But this time, in the middle of a movie, we heard what sounded like a light tapping on our door. We both looked over and thought, since we both heard it, maybe it was someone that worked there, or maybe someone just went to the wrong room. I got up to go see who it was, but when I looked out the eye hole, I saw nothing. It was pitch black, like someone was covering it up. That made me hesitate on opening the door, so instead, I just called out, can I help you?" But I didn't get a response. I stepped back from the door and let Raquel know what happened, which caused her to get up and go to the door too. However, when she looked out, it was clear and no one was there. So we both agreed to open the door, and of course, no one was out there. We stepped out and looked down one side of the hallway where the stairs and elevator were, then down the other hall where it was just a dead end. But this time, we actually did see someone. There was a woman standing at the end, her back towards us, and was seemingly looking out the little window. But the weirdest part was how this lady was dressed. She had on one of those old-fashioned ball gowns. We both just stood there and whispered to each other about it when we both felt a huge rush of cold air sweep by us. That's all it took for Raquel as she turned back around saying, "Oh hell no," and went back into the room. I followed quickly behind her and saw she was already on the phone calling services. She requested that an employee come to our room because someone was obviously trying to pull a prank. I could tell the tone of her voice was teetering between angry and terrified. Someone did show up to our room, and she explained the whole situation, talking about how we kept hearing whispering and the person standing at the window. I think the guy tried his best to take our complaint seriously, but I could also tell he did not care. He said he would go check the cameras and see who it was so they could then speak to the culprit. Being too freaked out to stay in our room anyways, we followed him to the front to watch the camera with him. We were better off just going back to bed and pretending nothing happened. We first stood at the desk while we waited for the guy to go back in the room and check the cameras. When he came back, he looked confused and asked us again for a rundown of what happened. After we explained everything, he asked us to follow him to the back where he showed us the footage. We saw the hall with our door on the right and all the way to the end where the window was. There was no movement and no people. It was completely still. Then, unexpectedly, the light seemed to dim or just got slightly darker, similar to what you might see if someone put their hand or someone else in front of the light above the camera, creating a shadow. So it was there for a few seconds, then back to normal lighting. Then shortly after the light went back to normal, you could see us open the door and walk out. We stood there, looked around, and then looked back towards the window and at each other, pointing out the person before then running back in. We saw this all play out again, except there was no lady at that window. We were shown staring in the direction, but there was nothing there. The guy looked confused and didn't know what to say to us. I stood there dumbfounded myself, but when I looked over at Raquel, she was obviously terrified and confused. The only thing she said was, "I know what I heard. I know what I saw, and I'll be damned if I have to sleep in that room another night." The guy escorted us back to the desk and asked us to wait there. The whole time, Raquel kept looking around the area, eyes wide like she was paranoid. I had never seen her like this before. The only thing I knew she was afraid of were bugs, but usually she just ran away from them, letting out some kind of yelp. But she looked absolutely terrified. I tried asking her if she was all right, and she just said, "I know you saw it too." Surprisingly, the guy came back and said they would move us to another cabin, but it would be a slight downgrade. Before I could say anything, Raquel said that was fine and we went back to get our things. We silently and quickly packed our stuff and went to our new room, all while the guy was apologizing to us. Once we got settled in, we went to bed saying very little with the lights and TV still on. The next day, Raquel had done a complete 180 and was back to being her bubbly, enthusiastic self. And to both of our surprise, I'm sure, we didn't have another event for the rest of the trip. I asked Raquel again about it when we went home, and she refused to talk about it, saying she didn't want any negative energy or bad spirits to follow us. So I was left on my own with the thoughts of what the hell we experienced. I'm conflicted to look into possible hauntings on cruise ships or mysterious deaths or disappearances, but while I may not be religious, what I saw and what Raquel told me is enough to make me hesitate. So instead, maybe I'll ask, has anyone ever experienced something similar while on a cruise? Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while now, and by a while, I mean years. I live in the same house my father grew up in, so it's kind of been the family home for a couple of generations now. It's a tiny little Cracker Jack box that was built in 1948 in the wake of World War II. My grandmother and my dad moved into it in the early 70s, before my dad was even out of elementary school. Originally, it was even smaller than it is now, but my grandpa had built an addition to it that included a laundry room and a small bedroom for my dad onto the back side of it. Most of my life, the house was pretty normal and didn't really creep me out. However, as time has passed, it has definitely started having its share of supernatural activity. There are at least 3 entities here. 2 of them, we have a fairly good idea who they are, mostly because they will respond, I suppose, when you say their names. I'll explain that more as we go along here. My Uncle Gale died when I was in my late teens or early 20s. He was a character. Typical Midwestern ex-Army vet that loved his wild turkey and cool cigarettes. He could be one of the most fun people to be around, or he can be a mean and miserable old codger. Not long after his passing, odd things started happening around the house. Things would vanish from where you sat them, be gone for a couple of days, then show up in a random room, i.e., things you would never take, much less leave in the bathroom, would appear there after an extended absence. One time, when my phone, my father's debit card, and my mother's reading glasses had all vanished in the same day, half joking and half in frustration, I said loudly, "Okay, Uncle Gale, this is not funny anymore. Give the stuff back." And 5 minutes later, my mother found all 3 items under her and my dad's bed. Fast forward now, and my mother passed away in 2022 during the pandemic, and at the start of 2024, I rescued a 15-month-old cane corso from some asshole druggy neighbors. Well, my dad was in the floor messing around with something. The dog, named Angel but not by my choice, was laying near him, and within the space of 45 seconds, 3 different objects literally attacked my dad. I told him that was definitely Mom expressing her displeasure at such a large dog being brought into the house. He laughed and said I was probably right. Those are the 2 entities that we know and are mostly benign. However, the third one is unnerving to say the least. At night in the laundry room, I hear all sorts of weird noises. It will sound as if things are moving, but even standing in the laundry room with the light on, you won't see anything moving, even though you will hear it. Okay, so not so bad, creepy, but something that can be lived with. But my room is the back bedroom off the laundry room. At night, I cannot have the door open at all, as I can feel something watching me at all times. And I can just tell that whatever it is angry. It has some deep-rooted dislike of me, and I never feel that anywhere but in the laundry room or at night if my door is open. It's 2:16 a.m. as I write this, and as soon as I started writing about the laundry room, the temperature dropped at least 5 degrees in my room, and Angel is snuggling me and shivering. I've never really talked about the strange things that occur in my home before, mostly because I have a dozen other stories that are far more interesting and intense, but tonight, I left my door open for a few minutes, and something was watching me, and the malevolence was palpable. I've never felt it so strongly before, nor has Angel ever really reacted, but she actually growled towards the door, and her hair stood straight up until I closed the door, and she still didn't relax until I locked it. So, yeah, hope you enjoy this. Back around 2006, I worked as a contracted security guard. I worked at a lot of different places, such as hotels, hospitals, tech and banking buildings, you name it. The job was always the same, with minimal rules varying depending on the business. I have plenty of stories of weirdos trying to get past me, vindictive ex-workers, and more that I'll have to consider sharing in the future. But the ones that freaked me out the most were the ones that I have no explanation for. I am by no means a small guy, and just standing within inches of someone was typically enough to get them to back off. But I will nope right the hell out of a haunted house. So when my next contract was in a closed hotel, I was less than thrilled about the idea. But I bucked up and told myself I could make it through the month and a half that I would be there. The hotel was empty because it had been shut down, and the owners went bankrupt. The people, or debtors I guess, had rights to the property, furniture, and whatever else was in the building, so they hired security guards to monitor it until they were able to retrieve everything they wanted. I worked some of the day shifts when they needed someone to cover it, but usually just worked the overnight ones. There was always a shift partner. We were never alone, so that definitely helped a lot to keep my mind busy so I didn't dwell on the creepiness around me. If you've ever been in a large, empty, or abandoned building, you may understand what I mean. The eerie silence is intense. When you look around and see the building is in good condition, and looks like you should see people coming out of the pool area, sounds of doors opening, people walking, and you see none of this, it kind of puts you in a situation where you feel like you should be on guard. Sorry, it's kind of hard to explain. Definitely like something bad is happening that you aren't aware of or will happen. It's just an unsettling feeling. Anyways, it was probably around 2 a.m. or so, and my shift partner, Trent, and I were talking about food when we became really hungry. We didn't really have a lot of places nearby that delivered, so he offered to go grab something for us. This is where my stomach was louder than my brain. I thought I could totally handle being alone for a short amount of time until he got back, so I agreed and he left. So I was sitting there at the front desk, just waiting for time to pass. I played some stock game that was on my phone given to us by our work, and then pulled out the small rubber ball I had found earlier that was in my pocket. I started bouncing it off the floor to the wall and would catch it and just repeat this over and over. Until one of these cycles, I was disrupted. The ball was coming back to me when it just seemed to fall to the ground. It was almost as if someone blocked it from coming back to me, causing it to just stop. It was definitely weird, but I chalked it up to it losing momentum. Maybe I didn't throw it very hard. So I went to pick up the ball when I started hearing a thumping noise. It made me stand up straight, stiff as a board when I heard it. Then I noticed the thumping was in the same pattern that I was causing with throwing the ball. Thump to the floor, thump to the wall, thump after catching. I stood there listening to this on repeat for several cycles. I first thought someone must be in here and maybe they're doing something else and it just conveniently sounded the same. Or someone was just messing with me. So I decided to check the floor above me, where it sounded like it was coming from. I took the stairs and started looking over the floor. I didn't immediately see anyone, so I continued looking down the halls, checking if any doors were open. We were given a master key that opened any and all doors in the hotel, including all the rooms, but from what I could see, there were no open doors. Then I heard what sounded like a door opening or closing. I turned to look towards the hall where I thought it was coming from and made my way in that direction. This is where I started to feel anxious. Something wasn't right, and I didn't know what it was, but not seeing the cause of the sound immediately was starting to make me panic. With my hand on my taser, I shouted out, This premises is closed to the public. You should leave now or you will be prosecuted by the owners. I was hoping that I sounded burly and threatening and didn't let my fear show through, but I was even more so hoping that whoever it was would just leave. However, it wouldn't be that easy. As I stood there and started to make my way down the hall, I heard what sounded like feet stomping or running, but I still was not seeing anything. The stomping continued to get louder and faster, like it was coming towards me, and I froze, not knowing what to do. Then suddenly, I felt a strong shift in the air and it got really cold. This is where my fight or flight finally kicked in, but I wasn't about to fight something I couldn't see, so I darted back downstairs to the first floor and out the front door. I refused to go back in that building alone and called Trent to see where he was at. He said he was pretty close by, so after he hung up, I took a minute to pull myself together and went back in, but I turned all the lights on the bottom floor on. We usually just had the light on at the desk and lobby, but I wanted to be able to see all around me at this point. When Trent got back, I told him that I thought I heard sounds upstairs but didn't find anything, and played it off as possibly hearing things or just echoed, so he brushed it off too. We never had another experience that night. I had to work there the next night, but had a different shift partner, and he seemed nervous from the start. I'm not one to make fun of people's fears, but I did ask him what was up. He then explained how the place gave him a really weird and off feeling that he couldn't shake. I asked him to explain more, and he told me his past experience, which was similar to mine. He mentioned the stomping/running noises he heard. So I probably shocked him when I started rambling about my paranoia of this place too, but he agreed with me. We both joked about how under no circumstances would we be going to the second floor, and we definitely weren't going anywhere alone. After talking to some of the other guys that work there, one of them mentioned how he was friends with one of the previous owners, and they told him he felt the place was haunted as they experienced the same thing. I was mentally freaking out. I was glad to know that I wasn't just being a coward and that others were experiencing this too, but then I had to acknowledge that this, whatever it was, existed. I did work through it, but I tried to swap shifts as much as I could because I don't do ghosts. Thankfully, I never had another experience, but I also avoided any situations that may have given me one. Oh, and they've since leveled that place, so good riddance. So that, my friends, was a collection of paranormal stories. Stories where the unsettling part is something that may not necessarily be human, and possibly even something we can't see, which is great. Just great. I call that an unfair fight. But what is fair is if you did like the video, you can like it. That's a fair trade-off. And if you haven't subscribed already, you can also hit that button to do so. And lastly, you can also leave a comment on your thoughts or a random word, and I will respond with a random word. And that is also a fair trade. We'll make this work. And with that being said, friends, I hope you have a fantastic week, and until next time, take care.